Diplomat's Archives. Hidden Stories. This is the 48th story. Seoul, Pyongyang, and Panmunjom. There's virtually only one country currently represented in all three locations on the Korean Peninsula. That country is Sweden. Sweden maintains diplomatic relations with both South and North Korea, and is also present in Panmunjom as a member state of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, making its relationship with the Korean Peninsula truly unique. But how did this special relationship between the Korean Peninsula and Sweden first begin? The hidden story between the Korean Peninsula and Sweden. Today, we bring it to you. The first tangible connection between South Korea and Sweden began in 1950 during the Korean War. On June 25, 1950, the Korean War broke out with North Korea's invasion of South Korea. The conflict quickly escalated across the Korean Peninsula. Countless lives were lost, and many were left wounded. Families were torn apart, children were orphaned, and many were forced to flee their homes. Amid this situation, Sweden was the first to send a medical support unit to South Korea. But what led Sweden to send a medical team to South Korea during the war? To better understand Sweden's position at the time, our team went to meet him.
I am Karl-OlofAndersson, Swedish ambassador to the Republic of Korea since August 2024. At the beginning of the Korean War, Sweden was asked if it could provide military support to the UN mission. The answer came on the 14th of July 1950. That Sweden, due to its neutrality, could not do so, but Sweden was willing to contribute a mobile field hospital that was to be organized by the Swedish Red Cross and funded by the Swedish government. So this was a voluntary-led mission supported by the Swedish military.
At the time, Sweden maintained its position as a neutral country and decided not to deploy combat troops to the Korean War. Instead, it sent a medical support unit to treat wounded soldiers and civilians affected by the war.
There was an urgent appeal that went out into Swedish radio for volunteers, and there was an overwhelming reply, also given the challenges with long distance and the danger of the mission. There were over 600 persons who wanted to sign up, and 176 were selected, and they became the first contingent, and they were in place on the 23rd of September 1950.
The Swedish medical team arrived at Busan port on September 23, 1950. At the time, all Swedish medical staff deployed to Korea were volunteers. But why did they choose to go to a country at war? To find the answer, our team held a video interview with the daughter of a Swedish medical staff member deployed to Korea at the time.
So, my name is Katarina Eriksson, and I'm the chairman of Korean Association in Sweden since 2023.
She has carried on the legacy of her father, Ingvar Svensson, who served with the Swedish Red Cross Field Hospital during the Korean War. Since 2014, she has been the chairperson of the Korean Association in Sweden, acting as a bridge between the Swedish veterans who took part in the war and Korea.
He was young, he was only 22 years old, and he told me that he needed some practical work experience to be accepted to university, to a course in social sciences that he was interested in. And he had been a medic in his military service a few years earlier, and he had heard about the Swedish Field Hospital in Korea, of course, because it started in 1950 already. So in 1953, he applied, and he served 6 months at the hospital in Busan. He was always very adventurous his whole life. So maybe it was a portion of that. And I think he also he wanted to make a difference. He had been trained as a medic. He wasn't afraid of challenges.
The Swedish medical personnel, each with their own reasons for joining, came together in Korea. They set up their base on the site of Busan Commercial High School. And there, the Swedish Red Cross Field Hospital was established. To learn more about the Swedish Red Cross Field Hospital, our team conducted a video interview with an expert.
안녕하십니까. 저는 박지욱입니다. 직업은 의사고요. 제주시에서 신경과 의원을 운영하고 있습니다. 그리고 몇 권의 책을 쓴 작가이기도 합니다.
Park Ji-wook, a physician with a long-standing interest in the history of medicine, sought to shed light on the Swedish Red Cross Field Hospital that had once operated in his hometown of Busan. In 2010, he published Korea's first academic paper on this subject.
부산 상업고등학교를 이제 징발해서 거기다 병원을 설치했습니다. 또 번듯한 교사가 있었고요. 또 넓은 운동장이 있었으니까 뭘 하기로는 최적의 부지였고, 실제로 부산 지역의 대부분의 학교들은 군 관련 시설에 징발이 많이 되었고, 일부는 이제 야전병원으로도 많이 쓰고 있었던 상황이었으니까 부산 상고를 야전병원으로 징발하는 것은 참 자연스러웠던 상황으로 생각이 됩니다.
But when the Swedish medical team arrived in Busan, they were met with very harsh conditions. On the first morning, we had to brush our teeth with cola. We had no water.
We didn't have real electricity, just the kind you had in the military service. You used a generator and sat on it like a bicycle and pedaled to get power so the doctors could see.
At the time, Busan itself was in severe chaos. In August 1950, as North Korean forces rapidly advanced southward, South Korean and United Nations troops were pushed back to the Busan area. In this situation, a final defensive line was formed along the Nakdong River, where intense battles continued day after day.
전쟁이 벌어지자마자 거의 물밀듯이 전선이 계속 남하해서 마지막 교두보로 삼은 것이 낙동강 전선이었습니다. 지금으로 본다면 경부고속도로 대구 경주, 그다음에 대구 마산 그 직사각형 선상에 낙동강 전선이 있었고요. 병원이 개원하던 날이 1950년 9월 25일입니다. 인천 상륙작전이 9월 15일, 서울 수복이 9월 28일, 바로 그 사이 기간이었습니다. 그러니까 인천에서 서울 쪽으로 진격이 있었고, 또 동시에 낙동강 전선에서 대반격 전투가 벌어지기 시작했습니다. 그래서 낙동강 전선에서 가까웠던 부산 지역에는 엄청난 규모의 부상병들이 후송되어 왔던 딱 그런 시기였습니다.
Amid this situation, Busan was in desperate need of medical support at the time. Hospitals were already overwhelmed by the continuous casualties from the Nakdong River front. In this context, the Swedish medical team and the hospital they established became a ray of hope. The Swedish Red Cross Field Hospital was hastily converted from a school during the war. Yet despite the urgency, it was equipped with 2 wards and 16 rooms, including examination rooms, a radiography unit, and an operating theater, among others. At the time of its opening, it had 200 beds and a total of 92 medical staff, including doctors, dentists, pharmacists, nurses, and radiology technicians, making it a remarkably large-scale hospital under wartime conditions.
9월 23일 부산항에 도착을 합니다. 그리고 이틀 정도 준비 기간을 거쳐서 9월 25일 저녁 6시에 개원을 합니다. 보통 이제 아침 9시에 개원을 하고 싶지 않겠습니까? 그런데 저녁 시간이라도 뭐 하루라도 빨리 병원 문을 열어서 부상병을 진료해야 되겠다 하는 그런 강한 의지가 보이는 거죠.
The initial medical rounds were a nightmare. Large halls with tightly packed rows of beds and a mixed group of Americans, Turks, Thais, Dutch, Ethiopians, and of course, English and French. One could speak of communication difficulties. The round took several hours.
When the Swedish medical team arrived in Busan, the city was already flooded with refugees. In June 1950, after Seoul fell, many people fled south to Busan, the last remaining safe haven. The government also relocated there, establishing a provisional capital. As refugees poured in, the number of patients rose sharply, but medical facilities and personnel were severely insufficient to cope. In this situation, the Swedish medical team treated not only soldiers, but also civilians who were in urgent need of care.
He told me that, for example, there were a lot of burns. There was a big fire in Busan when he was there. So he would, for example, assist by holding pieces of skin that was being applied to these wounds so that the skin wouldn't curl up. So he would do practical things like that. He was also one of those in the staff that worked a little bit outside of the hospital. So he was assigned to work in a refugee camp, Akasaki refugee camp, and also at the lepra colony. He worked with colleagues there.
전쟁이 터지고 웬만한 이제 의사들 들은 대부분 군에 징집이 됩니다. 그리고 민간 지역에 남은 의사들이 대략 한 800명 정도로 추정이 되는데요. 그러니까 의사 800명이 2천만 국민들을 치료하는 그런 상황이었죠. 그러니까 굉장히 우리 의료가 굉장히 열악했고 병원이나 시설들도 전쟁으로 피해를 많이 입고 의료 인력도 상당히 부족한 상태였습니다. 그런 상황에서 스웨덴 야전병원은 이제 대민 진료에 나오면서 진료비 없는 병원으로 누구든지 다 가서 치료받을 수 있는 그런 병원이었기 때문에 부산 시민들 또 대한 국민들에게 많은 도움을 주었을 걸로 생각합니다.
But that was not all. The Swedish Red Cross Field Hospital also took the lead in treating wounded North Korean and Chinese prisoners of war.
부산에 거제리에 포로 수용소가 있었습니다. 처음으로. 그래서 그 포로 수용소에서 이제 북한군, 중공군 포로들이 다 있었고요. 그 포로 수용소가 병원에서 그렇게 멀지가 않습니다. 가까운 곳에 있었기 때문에 그리고 이 스웨덴 병원이 적십자 병원이었고 스웨덴은 중립국이었기 때문에 유엔군, 북군 물론이고 적군이라고 할 수 있는 중공군이나 북한군도 폭넓게 치료할 수 있었던 걸로 생각합니다.
In 1953, although the war came to a halt, the Swedish medical team did not withdraw. The hospital was renamed the Swedish Hospital in Busan, after previously being known as the Swedish Red Cross Field Hospital. It then remained in Busan for another 4 years, caring for civilians affected by the war. From 1950 to 1957, over a span of 7 years, a total of 1,124 Swedish medical personnel treated approximately 2 million Korean patients.
본격적으로 민간인 진료를 하자. 그래서 병원 이름도 부산 스웨덴병원으로 이름을 바꾸게 됩니다. 그리고부터는 이제 그냥 거의 민간 병원처럼 진료를 시작을 합니다. 뭐 어떤 환자든지 다 수용을 했고요. 그리고 부산 지역에서 감염병, 특히 결핵에 관한 문제가 심각했기 때문에 결핵 환자를 위한 독립된 병동도 만들었고, 부산 지역의 많은 고아원들을 다니면서 이제 고아들에게 이제 BCG 접종이나 결핵 예방 사업을 합니다. 특이한 것은 이 무렵에는 스웨덴 본국에서 소아과 의사를, 야전병원에는 소아과 의사가 필요 없지 않습니까? 소아과 의사를 이제 파견받아서 이제 아동 구호 활동에도 열심히 했습니다.
But at this point, a question arises. What was life like for the Swedish medical personnel in Busan at the time? With Katarina's help, our team was able to access a book containing photographs and records left by her father and his colleagues. Through them, we gained a glimpse into their daily lives at the time. This book was published in 2025 through a donation from the Korean War Memorial Organization to the Korean Association in Sweden. Anyone can view this book at the War Memorial of Korea in Seoul.
There are many photos. Some of them he had, on display. Pretty photos. I remember one of a Korean farmer. But photos that made a deep impression of, on me, of course, were photos when you see people that have been hurt or injured or suffer. And there is one from the lepra colony. In this photo, there's a man smoking a cigarette, and he's lost most of his fingers. And this hand is visible, and it lacks, some fingers are just half, and other fingers are missing. And I remember that photo well. And it also shows and reminded me that they did not only treat soldiers or victims of the war, but also civilians and all kinds of diseases and injuries. But his photos are there, and they are still an important contribution. And I know that he would have been so happy to see these photos reach a wider audience. Of course, it will remind people of the horrors of war and tell the story of our contribution, of course, which is important to let Swedes know about. But they are also important reminders of the horrors of war. And of course, unfortunately, wars are going on in other places of the world as we speak. They are important historical documents.
Traces of Swedish medical personnel during the Korean War can be found not only in Busan, but also in Seoul. This is the National Medical Center located in Junggu, Seoul. Little known to many, Sweden and other Scandinavian countries, Norway and Denmark, made important contributions to the establishment of the National Medical Center in Korea.
그 병원은 이제 서울시립병원 틀을 주었죠. 그 정부에서 제공했고, 드는 돈은 이제 스칸디나비아 3개국 그리고 유엔에서 지원한 걸로 알고 있습니다. 병원들도 다 전쟁 피해를 입었고 제대로 이제 그 기능을 할 수 없는 상황에서 이제 제법 규모가 크고 번듯한 병원, 그리고 현대적인 이런 시설이 들어온 병원이 작동을, 이제 기능을 하게 되니까 상당히 선진적인 병원 시스템이 이제 우리 서울 한복판에 도입이 되었다 볼 수가 있습니다. 그리고 실제로 그 병원이 어느 정도였냐면 그 병원이 문을 열고 했을 때 규모나 시설이 동양에서는 최대 규모, 예, 그리고 최고의 의료 수준이다라고 평가를 받았다고 합니다. 그리고 가난한 환자들에게는 무료로 진료를 해줬기 때문에 아침부터 병원에 이제 오픈런이 있었던 병원이기도 했죠. 그러니까 이제 뭐 시설이나 또 의료진의 수준이나 그리고 또 환자를 보는 그런 역량들이 뭐 국내에서는 따라올 만한 병원이 없었다고 생각합니다.
At a time when Korea was enduring its most difficult moment, Sweden reached out a helping hand, hoping for the well-being of the Korean people and for peace on the Korean Peninsula.
The most challenging part was the orphan children. It broke my heart when we visited the orphanages, but they were cheerful and curious. I always had something to give them.
Tired, vaccinated about 500 people, and are discharging a lot of people. So we have 257 beds available for new patients. In the afternoon, several buses arrived.
A great experience for me after Korea was that there is not a great difference between people and people. It is so easy to get the impression that foreigners and other people are different. It's a nice feeling to understand this.
I think there was a general sense in the public that this was our universal humanitarian duty to support. It worked according to the Geneva Convention principles, treating everyone, UN soldiers, Korean civilians, as well as Chinese and North Korean prisoners of war. It held a very strong popular support in Sweden. People saw it as Sweden's contribution to global peace and to the newly formed United Nations. And it became a symbol of Swedish humanitarian engagement. And until today, Sweden has a very strong humanitarian involvement.
On July 27, 1953, an armistice agreement was finally signed. Under the agreement, a military demarcation line was drawn across the Korean Peninsula and a demilitarized zone was established, extending 2 kilometers on each side of the line. All hostilities were brought to a halt and further armed conflict was prohibited under the armistice. And during this process, a new body was established: the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission. It was a unique organization composed of countries that were not parties to the war, tasked with overseeing compliance with the armistice. And Sweden became one of its member countries.
I think the Swedish involvement in the NNSC has been very important for our relations. And at that time, Sweden was asked if it could be a permanent member of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission. The Swedish government decided to say yes. That was the start of a long-term permanent presence in peacekeeping along the DMZ. And this shows our dedication to peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula.
At the time, 4 countries participated in the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission. Sweden and Switzerland were nominated by the UN command side, while Poland and Czechoslovakia were nominated by the North Korean and Chinese side. Here, neutral countries referred to nations that were not parties to the Korean War and had not taken part in direct combat. A unique body tasked with monitoring the armistice. But under what circumstances was it established? To learn more about the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, our team met with an expert.
저는 강원대학교 지금 춘천에 있는 강원대학교 역사교육과에서 한국 근현대사를 가르치고 있고요. 정전을 관리하는 그 기구로서 중립국감독위원회가 이제 설치가 되는데 그 과정에 대해서 이제 최근에 연구하면서 본격적으로 특히 중립국감독위원회 관련된 자료들을 제가 회의로 관련된 자료들을 확인하면서 그 자료를 가지고 연구를 하게 됐습니다.
In 2024, Professor Kim published a study titled The Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission and North Korea's Response to Its Activities from 1953 to 1957.
처음에는 군사정전위원회라고 하는 적대적인 쌍방의 기구들, 그러니까 유엔군하고 공산군 측, 그러니까 북한하고 중국 측이 이제 쌍방이잖아요. 전쟁의 상대방이니까 그 쌍방이 동수로 구성된 군사정전위원회를 구성을 해가지고 전쟁을 다시 재발하려고 무기를 가져온다든지 아니면 군인을 증대한다든지 이런 거에 대해서 감시하자라고 합의하는 제안을 하죠. 그거를 유엔군 측이 먼저 제안을 합니다. 근데 여기에 대해서 흥미롭게도 적대적인 양측만을 구성을 할 경우에는 이게 어떤 협의가 안 될 경우가 있다. 중립국을 중심으로 한 어떤 기구를 만들자라고 북한 측이 제안을 해요. 중립국이 전쟁을 감시하거나 전쟁을 방지하는 역할을 했던 사례는 그 이전까지 제가 파악해서 아직 제가 다 못 찾은 걸 수도 있는데 없다고 보입니다. 그래서 되게 새로운 발상이었고.
But at this point, one question arises. How did Sweden come to participate in the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission?
근데 여기서 이제 흥미로운 거는 그렇다면 이 중립국을 어떤 나라로 할 거냐라고 유엔군 측에서 물어봅니다. 그쪽에서 제안을 했으니까. 그러니까 북한에서 중립국은 한반도 전쟁에 참여하진 전쟁의 전투에 참여하진 국가는 모두 중립국에 해당한다 라고 답변을 해요. 그러면서 예를 들면서 폴란드, 체코슬로바키아도 거기에 해당한다 라고 제안을 합니다. 그러자 유엔군 측에서 그렇다면 스위스, 스웨덴, 덴마크 같은 국가들도 중립국에 해당하느냐라고 물어봅니다. 그러자 그렇다. 그 과정에서 결국에 유엔군 쪽에서는 스위스, 스웨덴은 워낙 오래된 중립국이었기 때문에 너무 당연하게 이건 중립국이라고 서방 진영에서는 미국을 포함 서방 진영에서 너무 당연한 국가라고 생각했기 때문에 제안했던 거고.
On August 1st, 1953, the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission began its work with its first meeting. The headquarters of the commission was established in Panmunjom, with 20 inspection teams deployed across the Korean Peninsula. At the time, the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission carried out 3 main tasks. First, it monitored and inspected the rotation of troops and the import and replacement of military equipment at designated ports of entry in both South and North Korea. Second, at the request of either party to the armistice, it conducted special inspection activities regarding alleged violations of the armistice occurring outside the demilitarized zone. Third, to ensure a more effective armistice regime, It reported its inspection findings and the parties' compliance with the armistice to the Military Armistice Commission. However, these activities of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission did not continue in their original form for long.
4개 국가, 그러니까 폴란드, 체코슬로바키아하고 함께 운영하는 이 4개 국가가 다수결로 어떤 결정을 해야 되는데, 이 다수결이라는 게 자칫하면은 이게 공산 측에서 지명한 2개 국가와 서방 측에서 유엔 측에서 지명한 2개 국가가 서로 대립하는 경우에 2대2가 되면은 동수가 되면 부결이 돼요. 그럼 아무것도 행동을 할 수 없게 됩니다. 그래서 예를 들면 북한 지역에서의 어떤 비행장에 뭐 외국 무기가 들어온다든지 어떤 이런 문제에 대한 조사가 필요한데, 그거를 하고 싶어도 폴란드나 체코슬로바키아 쪽에서 반대를 해버리면 조사를 할 수 없게 되는 현실적인 문제에 맞닥뜨려요. 그리고 또 남한 쪽에서는 이스만 대통령이 폴란드와 체코슬로바키아는 공산군이기 때문에 간첩이다라고 해서 못 들어오게 하고 막 반대하고 막 엄청난 공격을 가하기도 하고 이런 문제들이 발생을 하죠. 그래서 실질적으로 감시와 군사 물자의 증원이나 군인 증원의 문제에 있어서의 조사를 실질적으로 하는데 한계를 느꼈습니다.
By the mid-1950s, as the Cold War intensified, mutual tensions and distrust grew, and the field activities of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission were gradually restricted, particularly by limitations imposed by the parties involved. And in 1954, when the Geneva Conference, convened to seek a peaceful resolution to the Korean question, ended without results, the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission came under pressure to withdraw amid doubts about its effectiveness. Eventually, in June 1956, its operations were reduced and concentrated around Panmunjom. And in 1993, the Commission underwent another major transformation.
체코하고 슬로바키아가 분리가 되는 과정에서 자연스럽게 체코는 자진 철수를 하게 되는 과정이 되는 거고요. 실질적으로 이제 폴란드도 철수하라라고 계속 종용을 했다고 해요. 이게 사실 이제 자료를 통해서 좀 더 연구가 돼야 되는데 95년에 판문점에서 최종적으로 철수는 합니다. 근데 이제 폴란드 같은 경우에는 북한이 더 이상 지원하지 않기 때문에 거기 있을 수 없어서 철수는 했지만 여전히 지금도 폴란드 자국 내에 중립국감독위원회라는 대표들이 존재하고 있고 그들의 존재성, 그 어떤 기구로서 역할을 하고 있다라고 발표를 하고 있습니다. 근데 그러면서 스위스와 스웨덴만 남아 있는 형태가 되는 거죠. 그리고 그때부터 북한은 어쨌든 스위스, 스웨덴조차도 중립국감독위원회로서의 역할을 받아들이지 않았고.
Although the role of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission has gradually diminished over time, Sweden still remains in place and continues its mission. So what role does Sweden play in the Commission today? And what kind of relationship does Sweden currently maintain with North Korea? An unfinished hidden story between the Korean Peninsula and Sweden, to be continued in the next episode.